Donald Trump has already made clear what one of his biggest fronts in international politics is going to be: the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Well, they can't have a nuclear weapon.
Did you mean military action, though, if they don't agree?
Oh, if necessary? Absolutely. Yeah, we have a little time, but we don't have much time.
Who is he starting?
Because we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
For several weeks now, senior representatives of the US government and the Iranian regime have been holding talks. They first met in Oman, then in Rome, and of course, there will be more. We are talking about high-level contacts that are taking place 7 years after the nuclear pact between the two sides broke into 1,000 pieces. And so far, things seem to be off to a relatively good start.
The counterpart demonstrated today a significant effort to show its willingness to reach a fair and adequate agreement. We must now evaluate this round of negotiations, further analyze the discussions raised, and consult at different levels.
Unlike what seems to be happening with the negotiations on Ukraine, in this case, they seem to be progressing, as I said, at a good pace. Although yes, these are only rumors, because the truth is that the negotiations have been completely behind closed doors. It seems Iran has been increasing its nuclear capabilities since 2018, and the threat level may now have reached an intolerable level for the international community, and particularly for a White House that fears Iran will become a huge headache and end up provoking, you guessed it, yet another war in the Middle East, or even a nuclear race. In other words, let's be clear, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and this is known in Washington, Brussels, and Jerusalem. Iran cannot be a nuclear power, and yet we get this.
The International Atomic Energy Agency warned that Iran accelerated uranium production to near weapons grade. As of February 8th, Iran possessed 274.8 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. This is up from 92.5 kilograms since the last report published in November.
As you can see, in the last 6 months alone, the Ayatollah's regime may have tripled its stock of enriched uranium, a production peak that has just occurred after Donald Trump's victory. Coincidence? Probably not. It's likely that Tehran saw the writing on the wall and thought that this was the right moment to step on the accelerator, either to negotiate hard or to try to get hold of the mother of all deterrent weapons in the world as quickly as possible. And the fact is, Trump and the Ayatollahs don't exactly get along. They didn't during the US president's first term, and now, well, the White House tenant has even been weighing up what an Iranian attack against him would look like.
That would be a terrible thing for them to do, not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That'd be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. There won't be anything left.
Nevertheless, the negotiations seem to be healing some wounds, but of course we're talking about the Middle East, so you never know. The temperature could rise at any time. And it is right here that we have asked several questions. What is Trump hoping for with these new negotiations? Is the US president giving the Ayatollahs an ultimatum? How far has Tehran's nuclear program gone these past years? Are we facing the last diplomatic opportunity to resolve the impending clash between Washington and the Iranian regime? Well, we're going to look at all this and more, so strap yourself in and let's get started. Talking about a nuclear deal with Iran is not exactly anything new. Many of you will recall that back in 2015, Iran and a group of countries known as the P5+1, along with the European Union as party coordinator, signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Tehran. In that agreement, Iran pledged to significantly reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium and reduce its nuclear capabilities by avoiding building reactors or refining facilities for military purposes.
The United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Because of this deal, the international community will be able to verify that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon.
Since the signing of the agreement, the International Atomic Energy Agency has made regular visits to Iranian nuclear facilities to monitor and verify compliance. Of course, several countries have always had many doubts about the transparency of the Iranian authorities. And not surprisingly, in the end, it was all about taking the word of a totalitarian regime accustomed to financing barbarities and the odd terrorist group. Without going any further, these same types fueled episodes as Dantesque and with as many consequences as the October 7th attacks against Israel. Speaking of Israel, this country, along with various political sectors in the United States, at the time widely condemned that the Ayatollahs were continuing their nuclear race in secret bases, that they were laughing at the agreement. So when Donald Trump came to the White House, a joint comprehensive plan of action simply blew up.
The Iranian regime is the leading state sponsor of terror. It exports dangerous missiles, fuels conflicts across the Middle East, and supports terrorist proxies and militias such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda. If I allowed this deal to stand, there would soon be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East.
Trump's unilateral cancellation of the agreement in his first term was later somewhat endorsed by the subsequent administration. Why? Because although Joe Biden tried to negotiate, he didn't try very hard to bring these talks to a successful conclusion. In other words, could it be said that in Washington, it has become clear that the Ayatollahs are not to be trusted? Well, at least that's what we thought, until now.
His ultimate goal and the ultimate objective is to ensure that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. The president believes in diplomacy, direct talks, talking directly in the same room in order to achieve that goal. But he's made it very clear to the Iranians, and his national security team will as well, that all options are on the table.
The US president now says he's enthusiastic about the new diplomatic talks taking place with Iran. And the question is, why? And why right now? After all, Tehran remains a theocratic dictatorship that finances international terrorism. That has not changed. What's more, as we said earlier, their actions have gone far beyond that. We've even seen the launching of ballistic missiles against Israel and how Tehran's Yemeni franchise blocks the waters of the Red Sea. So, why does Trump, the lord of deals and tough diplomacy, suddenly think he can appease them? Well, despite the fact that the White House has shown an erratic course in recent weeks, that's been, how should I put it, erratic, the truth is that the strategy towards Iran seems to have at least some consistency. In other words, the negotiations that have been launched in Oman seem to be more focused on an ultimatum than on the search for an agreement. The president's team has told the Iranian regime that Washington wants the dismantling of the nuclear program full stop, that it's time to do it, and that the only thing up for discussion is the how. If the Ayatollahs want to do it the easy way, by agreeing to a timetable for the dismantling and demolition of their nuclear facilities, fantastic, long live diplomacy. But if the answer is no, things are going to happen the hard way, which could lead directly to a scenario so violent that not even Trump himself dares to describe it accurately.
And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it, so we're going to see if we can avoid it.
VisualPolitik community, Trump is saying that he is clear that he will bomb Iranian nuclear facilities if Tehran decides to continue its race for the bomb regardless. And although with Trump, you never know when the threat is for real, the truth is that this way of approaching a negotiation with a country like Iran may make sense. Among other things, because we've told you many times, Iran cannot have the nuclear bomb. Not only would it be a huge risk, but it could trigger a crazy atomic race in the Middle East. Not to mention the measures Israel would have to take. On top of all that, this time there is a tailwind for the White House. All experts agree that Iran is going through its worst moment.
Iran's terrible, horrible, very bad year. Strategically, the wisest option for Iran right now would be to retreat to the shadows, rebuild its proxy network, and fight another day. After all, it will take time to rebuild Hamas and Hezbollah into the formidable fighting forces they once were.
Over the last 12 months, the Ayatollahs have seen the crumbling of almost all the military forces of Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. What's more, the missile attacks in April and October 2024 were true theater. More than 95% were intercepted. In fact, it's most likely that they were launched with the intention that most of the projectiles would be intercepted. But even so, the image was not the best. And there's still more. Shortly after, we had the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, a key ally of Tehran. An event that, by the way, has not only meant the loss of Syria, but has also left Hezbollah without a key logistical base to obtain supplies. That said, the Ayatollahs have experienced more setbacks in the last 12 months than in many years. Perhaps their mistake, Tehran's mistake, was to believe that they could cope with so many conflicts, and now they are paying the price for having overestimated their capabilities in the region. But hold on a minute. While the Ayatollahs' vulnerability is clear, that doesn't mean that destroying their nuclear facilities will be a piece of cake. Iran still manages or influences many smaller terrorist networks and cells around the world, so there is fear that a retaliation could end up with embassy attacks, bombings at public events, or even intifadas in the West, including, of course, in the United States. Apart from that, as you can imagine, these facilities are well protected, and that is why the White House's first option is to seek agreement. The problem is that, definitively, eliminating Iranian nuclear capabilities would be great news for the security of the Middle East, and probably the world, but it could also spell the beginning of the end for the Ayatollahs. But can Iran really afford to decommission its nuclear program? How far along are its plans? Would Trump make good on his threat to go in the hard way if necessary? Well, pay attention.
Loaded and ready.
The Iranian nuclear program is one of the greatest mysteries of recent decades. The regime in Tehran has always claimed that its intentions are peaceful, but everyone knows that this is not the case. The regime of the Ayatollahs has been trying since the 1980s to build its own nuclear arsenal, especially to counter the power of Israel, which supposedly does have the atomic bomb. And I say supposedly because this has never officially been confirmed. Now, are the Iranians close to having a weapon of mass destruction? Well, let's put on Oppenheimer's glasses for a moment and take a look. Since 2024, several sources indicate that Iran began building thousands of advanced centrifuges for uranium refining. Because, as you know, this element cannot be extracted from the earth and introduced directly into a pump. It needs to be enriched. This is something like washing it over and over again so that its concentration increases, and therefore it becomes richer in the U-235 isotope. And here, something must be taken into account. It's straightforward to understand that Iran has used uranium for military applications, because to maintain a civilian nuclear power plant, uranium enriched to between 3 and 5% would be sufficient. On the other hand, the Ayatollahs have a stock of almost 300 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. This is a level of enrichment that is not sufficient to manufacture an atomic bomb, because it needs to reach 90%, but one that far exceeds what is required for a civilian nuclear program. And that's not all. It's not enough to just have the device. You need to have the instrument to use. A nuclear missile needs a detonation system, atmospheric re-entry capabilities, and also high precision flight. And this as the minimum. Well, a few years ago, it was thought that Iran's missile program was already well advanced in that direction. For example, the Ayatollahs have several times shown these missiles you can see on screen as the creme de la creme of their ballistic missiles. However, the attacks against Israel in 2024 highlighted several problems.
Many Iranian missiles failed to launch or crashed before striking target. When asked for more details about those strikes, the officials acknowledged that only about half of them were intercepted successfully. The rest failed in flight and didn't reach their targets, the officials said.
So, what does this mean? Well, with the lack of enriched uranium and the failures in its ballistic capabilities, everything indicates that Iran still has a reduced nuclear power. What Tehran could build in the near future are certain types of nuclear weapons, what some call crude weapons, similar to the bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're talking about gigantic bombs that would have to be carried by huge, slow bombers on long flights, and therefore would be very vulnerable. Yes, Iran could detonate such a weapon in the desert to prove that it built a nuclear bomb, and certainly if that did not happen, it would not be very reassuring. But in reality, it is a device that could not be used even against neighboring countries. In other words, the Iranian regime comes to the negotiating table with few credible threats, so a scheme of maximum US pressure at this point could be the right card to play, and it is now or never. Because it stands to reason that one day Iran will overcome all those constraints, and it may not be far off. And that's why the White House doesn't appear to be looking for a deal similar to Obama's 2015 deal this time around. In fact, during his recent visit to the White House, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made reference to a particular case, the Libya of 2003.
Look, we're both united in the goal that Iran does not ever get nuclear weapons. If it could be done diplomatically in a full way, the way it was done in Libya, I think that would be a good thing. But whatever happens, we have to make sure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons.
Now, is this scenario possible in Iran? The truth is that it's not. In fact, using Libya as an example is not exactly a great idea on Netanyahu's part to give Tehran confidence that they will cease their program.
In 2003, Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi agreed to dismantle his weapons of mass destruction program in exchange for the lifting of several oil sanctions against his regime. The measure was approved by the Security Council, creating a coalition of Western experts who systematically destroyed Libyan weapons. Libya then managed to develop good relations with European politicians, and in a way became a silent partner of Western black gold. However, one fine day things went wrong, and in 2011, a coalition of European countries launched an air offensive against Libya that ended with Gaddafi dead and his regime overthrown.
This, in fact, is often cited by other dictatorships, such as North Korea and the Iranian dictatorship itself, to emphasize the importance of never giving up their nuclear programs, because they're afraid that one day's fine words will soon turn into a nightmare for their power structure. And that's precisely the reason why the Ayatollahs are absolutely convinced that Iran needs a nuclear deterrence. So, US negotiators know they need much more than a good deal to get the Iranian regime to agree to give up its main lifeline. Hence, they are turning the way they negotiate around. In other words, instead of promising them peace and goodwill if they give up the atomic bomb, what they are telling them is that there will be war and the end of the regime if they don't give it up. Can it work? Well, we don't know yet, but with the historical background of similar negotiations, there's not much choice. Of course, just a moment, because here we come to another important point to be taken into account. These first months of Trump's term, many countries have already gotten the hang of it. They've already seen the president's cards. First he barks, then he bares his teeth, then he tones it down. We've seen it with Mexico, with Canada, with Ukraine, and of course with tariffs. We've even seen it with China. So, could the same story be repeated with Iran? Well, let's see. There are some nuances here that we have to take into account. In theory, things look different because putting the military option on the table is a point of no return. We aren't talking here about a few percentage points more in a given tariff or an oil license at stake. We're talking here about a promise of fire and ashes, something that will not stop until the plan is fulfilled. If Iran's assurances to Trump are not enough, then this president would have to keep his promise if he doesn't want to be taken for a ride at home and abroad, because withdrawing from a tariff war is not the same as threatening Iran at a negotiating table and then doing nothing. In fact, that would give oxygen to the Iranian regime. Trump hasn't dared, even in our worst moment. Hey, now we can really go for it. Which VisualPolitik community opens up two possible scenarios. Either Trump pretends that a good deal has been reached that is nothing more than a 2.0 version of Obama's failed deal, so as to sell it as an unprecedented breakthrough, a great deal and blah blah blah, or he presses the red button. And for this, the United States could have almost everything ready. Because, you see, a strategic bombing of Iran involves two very sensitive points. First, we would have the US Central Command's Al Udeid airbase, located in Qatar, some 300 kilometers from Iran. This gives US aircraft just 15 minutes flying time from Iranian territory. Then, a few kilometers away, is the United States Fifth Fleet, located in Bahrain, which allows them to project their presence in the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea. On top of that, the United States has also deployed two additional aircraft carriers, the USS Carl Vinson and the USS Harry S. Truman, to the area in recent weeks. And while these forces have focused on Houthi threats in Yemen, some analysts believe that Washington has actually used these moves to prepare its strategy of military tension against Iran. But beware, because it may be that neither the bases in Qatar nor those in Bahrain would be in charge of unleashing hell on the Ayatollahs. The Al Udeid airbase and the maneuvers of the Fifth Fleet would actually have as their main mission the defense of the region against an Iranian counterattack. Among other reasons, because if one thing is clear to US intelligence, it's that Iranian nuclear laboratories and facilities are underground, and this requires special weaponry. So the US Air Force has prepared its dress suit for that possible rendezvous. We're talking about the Northrop Grumman B-2 Spirit.
U.S. deploys 6 B-2 bombers to Indian Ocean Base ahead of Washington's talks with Iran as tensions flare. The bombers are the only U.S. aircraft capable of carrying GBU-57 bunker busters, the largest non-nuclear American bomb, which is designed to strike underground targets.
6 bombers may not seem like a lot to you, but that's 30% of the entire US B-2 Spirit fleet. And do you know what the best thing is? That the Americans don't seem to have been too concerned about hiding this deployment. In fact, the deployment of these bombers was detected by civilian satellites from the company Planet Labs. You know, the art of aggressive negotiation. We stand tough, they will be afraid of us, and they will give in. The question is, are they right? Well, let's take a look.
The Persian Abyss.
Iran lives in a hostile neighborhood where the problems from the perspective of the Ayatollah's regime go far beyond Israel and the United States.
We're also talking about Saudi Arabia and its Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf, a group of nations that in practice functions as an anti-Iran alliance, rivaling the regional power of the Ayatollahs, not to mention the various religious worldviews, Shiites versus Sunnis. For this regime, nuclear deterrence is a matter of survival, so the destruction of its program could be almost as lethal as a massive bombing of Tehran.
It would be something like taking away its last remaining weapon, something strategically inconceivable. This is what worries different experts the most. If Iran cannot meet Trump's demands, and he is forced to keep his word, could this really end in war? Well, right now, it's hard to tell, but the odds are increasing at full speed. Of course, negotiations with Iran could drag on for weeks or months as the Oval Office seeks to delay the use of the red button. Be that as it may, Trump has sat down at the table and placed his bet. The poker game has already begun, and both players have started it with a true all-in. Of course, at VisualPolitik, we will closely follow everything that happens, but for now, it's your turn. What do you think will be the outcome of this round of negotiations? Will Trump achieve Tehran's nuclear disarmament? Do you see a military option on Ukrainian nuclear power as viable? Leave us your opinions below in the comments, and let's start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. As always, thank you very much for being there. All the best. I'll see you next time.